Hello. So, the first reading I'm going to talk about is Queer Theory and Introduction by Anne Marie Jagos. And so, I believe that the book is examining how queer theory came to be. It alludes to various historical influences that have produced or yielded queer theory, the movements such as like homophile movement, the gay liberation, lesbian feminism, and things of that nature. So there isn't really a universal definition for the word queer. So queer theory makes you or encourages one to think of identity, sexuality, and gender in a different light than we have been socially constructed to originally think of them in. So it negates beliefs of like heterosexual desires, so binary gender system, a man and a woman, in a binary sex system, a male and a female. So it takes heteronormativity, which is like everything that we have came to think is the truth about heterosexuals, as not normal. So that a man should be with a woman, that's kind of debunking that myth. And it's not to say that queer theory is like synonymous to lesbian and gay studies, but more as like a break off of lesbian and gay studies. So without literature and theories on lesbians and gay studies, then queer theory really wouldn't be here. So it's an elastic term that, as Anne Marie says, it doesn't have a one-all definition, but a commonality of queer is that it opposes normativity and it is unstable, so it's constantly changing and adapting to the people that associate themselves with the term queer. It maps out the evolution of queer theory, and one of the main things that I picked up on was that it calls to question categories and identities. So, like Anne Marie says, who is homosexual, not what does it mean to be homosexual. And I feel like that could be other questions that people can ask could be who is female, like who is male, and just any of these like social constructs. Just questioning like what makes that person, like who are they, not what is it that society says they should be, who are they as a person. And queer identity is one way to, for people to affiliate themselves with something larger than the social constructs of, of like male and woman, and, gender heteronormativity notions. So queer seems to be an effect, or queer is not the effect. Queer yields, I guess you could say, the heterosexuality. So as in saying that heterosexuality is an effect of queer, it is the effect of like the dominant socio-cultural and sexual forms that we all have come to know. So I think that is a very important takeaway, questioning identities in the sense that they are socially constructed improperly and wrongly. So queer theory came to be to negate all of these normalizations that we believe. Key important takeaway I got from this reading came out of chapter 6, which was titled The Limits of Identity. So it is talking about the identity of, lesbians, feminists, and then it brings in, race to these things because, they're all intersectional. So the way that white, cis people are affected by oppression is completely different than the way a minority cis person would, or even like a minority homosexual person is. So it calls in, to question these structures and all these things. And queer theory, I think, also seeks to answer how movements create identities, the historical context surrounding it, and how like transformative they are, across boundaries, across cultural norms. So that is also something that should be questioned. How do these movements formulate what people see as an identity? So debunking, categories that we typically come to know, and examining these categories in their historical and cultural sense is very important to queer theory. A quote that I would like to discuss came from Chapter 7, which is titled Queer, and it states that although there is no agreement on the exact definition of queer, the interdependent spheres of activism and theory that constitute its necessary context have undergone various shifts. So, queer and lesbian and gay, are not synonymous to each other. They all have came to be, from different movements, from different social contexts, different cultural norms. And so when we are thinking of queer, we must, think of it as various, and it's ongoing. It's ever changing. It's unstable, so it's very adaptive. People can adapt to it. Movements can adapt to it. It changes as social policies change, as humans evolve. It's an ever-changing theory that needs to be constantly looked at in order to really grasp the concept of it, because it is always changing. So if we even taking this reading was, I believe, from 1996. So the queer theory has adapted and evolved much since this has been written. So it's important to not just stick with one sphere of queer theory. There's multiple components. It's multifaceted. And in order to really understand, queer theory and what it means to be queer, we as, scholars, researchers, whatever, we need to be conscious of the fact that it is constantly evolving, and we must work to really understand the different levels of it, across cultural barriers, context, political factors, and everything that makes queer theory what it is. I want to bring it back to the point of identity, because, identity is, I think, one of the overarching themes of this book and potentially queer theory. So there is, Anne-Marie defines identity as an effective identification with and against others, that it's being ongoing, always incomplete, and it is a process rather than a property. So I think, it being a process is key within this definition. That means there are multiple components that go into it. It is not just one size fit all. You can change identities if you like, and I think that is very important, to those who identify as queer. You don't have to fit into, the heteronormative norms. You don't have to affiliate with a gender. You don't have to affiliate with a sexual identity. You just are who you are. You're not a lesbian woman. You're not a homosexual man. You are queer, simply as that, and this process is evolving for people as well, so it's a process that evolves on personally, within the identity, and then it evolves against other categories. So even though, queer theory seeks to denounce categories, and they believe that, queer theory has the notion that categories are arbitrary, and that they are oppressive, and we must debunk all of these myths that categorize people into different identities and then further oppresses them through it. So queer theory seeks to denormalize and deregulate heteronormativity notions. So it confounds the categories that license sexual identity in that sense. So you don't have to be a woman that that gets her nails done and puts on a dress every day for work, and you don't have to be the male that is macho all the time. It just wants to break down those barriers and break down those walls to kind of create a sense of unity. Therefore, it would reduce, oppression towards certain people who identify in whatever way that they feel like. She produced her work in the mid 1990s, and another article came out in 2013 titled "What the Fuck is Queer Theory" by Eugene Wolters. And there are, I think, many similarities between the texts. They are talking about the issues of power in queer theory, the gender roles being affected by capitalism, which furthers oppression. They are shedding light on debunking myths, like socially constructed values, and questioning what is normal. Who is normal, what is normal, what do normal people do, kind of questioning what does it mean to be male, what does it mean to be female. So there are many similarities, but I saw was different in Eugene's work from Anne Marie's was that he discussed genocide. He brought up Hitler twice in his readings, and as we know, Hitler systematically killed 6 million Jewish people as an act of genocide, and it makes me think of oppression. Is like oppression like genocide, unlabeled genocide? Like oppression kills people. Forcing like marginalizing groups of people, and like with marginalizing like homosexuals, and then further if we have like minority homosexuals, or we have people who really deviate from the norm of society and become transgender. There are a lot of intentional acts against those, like physical violent acts against them. There is a lot of talk about them in the media, and we never really know what someone's going through. And although there aren't many discussed deaths within the like the transgender community or the gay community or lesbian community, they are there. So I think that is like important to think of like oppression as genocide, and maybe it's not killing like 6 million people in such a short amount of time, but like over the years, oppression should be thought of as genocide. It does kill, and maybe if it doesn't kill, it really, really like immobilizes groups to the point where they can't do anything, or they feel that they can't do anything. And if they have like no power or no say in anything, then what is that really living? Another quote that really struck me in Eugene's work was him saying, "So that bro in the Ed Hardy shirt chugging a can of Four Loko after a long day of anabolic, steroid-fueled iron pumping isn't just a raging douche monster. He's also performing a very specific and historically defined notion of masculinity, gender, and sexuality that are entangled in a complete matrix of power." And Anne Marie also alludes to the power imbalances within queer theory, and I think that is important to look at. So when people are performing these or like acting on these socially constructed narratives, such as wearing a dress, getting your nails done, or like being macho, like I previously said, they are giving in. That is the production of power. They are giving in to the cultural norms, and they are abiding by things that society has taught them that they should do. So by giving in to this matrix of power, they are further going away from what queer theory seeks to do, which is, debunk, demoralize, destabilize all of these heteronormative values in order to give way to a new way of looking at gender, sexuality, and identity. So I think that is also very key, the matrix of power and how power plays into these situations. So Eugene has coined a term that kind of defines what it means to break down heteronormative values, which he termed genderfuck. So it's used as like a political strategy in order to like break down the barriers of these norms. So this can be done through like sex, cross-dressing, drag performance, or like any form of really kind of like bending the socially constructed norm of gender. And he goes on to talk about how queer theory can be thought of as like Neo from The Matrix. And if you haven't seen The Matrix, Neo was taught that everything is a lie, and that you can, what you have in your head isn't necessarily like the truth, your thoughts on things and how you form your beliefs, so that these thoughts can be, diverted, or they can be bent in ways that are more accepting of the actual reality, and especially other people's realities, which can be far different from our own realities. So it's kind of saying like there is no gender, no there is no male, there is no female. Like, those myths can be debunked, but you just have to be the one to think about it. You have to take your own time and effort out to really consider this and kind of rewire your brain into understanding other people's realities. What was interesting from this reading was that, queer theory seeks to destabilize norms, and so those who identify as queer should be acting and learning and producing information in a way that debunks these norms. However, within the queer community itself, it doesn't always happen. So, homosexual men who are, like flamboyant, or, like dress very feminine, or, talk in a really, really high-pitched voice, have been, labeled fairies. And women that participate in BDSM, which is, I guess you could say, like a violent sexual life, are considered women that hate other women, because it goes directly against the women's non-oppression, so it goes to further put someone in this position to harm them, to demoralize them, or whatnot, what have you. That means you dislike them. But, it's just interesting, because if you're having sex with this woman, woman to woman, essentially you like this person and you guys enjoy what you're doing. However, people within the community have labeled them as like women haters. So it goes to show that it's very challenging, to really adopt a queer theory and live it out to its full potential, because there are other, there's labels come with notions that, with these notions like BDSM, meaning that you hate women. So we can think of queer theory as something that's constantly breaking down social norms and institutions. So therefore the literature is constantly being updated, or should be updated, to reflect, the destruction of these like norms, and how these norms and how the destruction of these norms constantly mean that queer theory is also changing its identity, which was another factor that I pulled out of Anne Marie's work. So this brings me to my next reading, which is the Thinking Sex, Notes for a Radical Theory of the Politics of Reality, which was produced by Gayle Rubin, whom is a queer theorist herself. So it really touches on sex, as like focuses on like how Western cultures perceives sex, and it details how sex is political. It has become political through legislation, such as like the Gay Act in Florida in 1977. There is like female genital mutilation, happening in America. Prostitution is illegal in some states, but legal in others. And a key takeaway from me in this reading was that all of these values tie back to religion. So religion kind of has, in my opinion, been destroying America for longer than people perceive, or can even comprehend. For someone who is religious, that is probably very offensive, and it would be very difficult for them to kind of like fathom that concept, and how religion directly, ties into sexual oppression and, just oppression in general. So these sex is kind of thought of as sinful. And, if you're a devout Catholic, having sex out of wedlock is, the ultimate sin. And a lot of times, families will ostracize you, simply for this, for your sexual act. So it was very interesting to me to read about how she portrayed religion and how it relates to sexuality, being political. So there's a key sentence. Says the intensity of this stigma is rooted in Western religious traditions, and she is referring to the stigmas surrounding sex. Prostitution, having sex out of marriage. Homosexual sex, BDSM. Whatever type of sex you like to have. So I think the Western society has, and especially America, is for being the most and one of the most industrialized countries in the world. We are far back behind so many other countries in so many ways, and it's just astonishing because we have all these like literature out there, all this research, all these like scholars, speaking, trying to just inform people, and here we are just still kind of going by what we've always been taught, like all just consistently following social constructs instead of trying to make new constructs, which I believe is what queer theory is attempting to do. It's turning away from things that we have known and bringing about new knowledge and a new way of thinking about things that is completely rational, although it might not seem realistic to others. So I think that the way that sex is political is like further driven by religious ideologies, which are predominantly within the United States culture, and the policies that are enacted. And it kind of reminds me of the abortion bans that are happening now in multiple states, and how the government, we're supposed to have a separation of church and state, but somehow they're intervening with each other. And medical professionals, or not medical professionals, but the politicians have just now taken away women's rights to terminate a pregnancy. And that's a lot of the reasons given for that were the religious ideologies that Gail often alludes to throughout this entire reading. Gail really strengthened her argument, in my opinion, that sex is a political agent, was alluding to Michael Foucault's theory that sex is a discourse, and that it is institutionalized as time goes on. And Anne-Marie also alluded to Michael Foucault in the queer theory book, discussing sex as a discourse, and how it shouldn't be like a good discourse versus bad discourse. It should just be like a multifaceted discourse that makes up a whole, in the sense that sexuality is repressed by medicine, location, and things of the sort. It is important to look at the discourse of sex from the angle that it is institutionalized from, so like through religion and policies, and how it further represses it and takes away from the multivariational unified discourse of sex. I also read The Straight Mind and Other essay by Monique Whitting, which was produced in 1992 and really ties in theory and politics as it relates to feminism. So one of the main takeaways that from this reading was that the patriarchy is like a political regime, so heterosexuality is political in the sense that those who take on patriarchal values are, further oppressing women and further pushing their own agenda. So, they're getting all the gain, and obviously their oppressors are just further being diminished. So it really, in my eyes, was kind of trying to overcome the socially enforced gender roles. So women only exist through its relations to men. So therefore, if there were no men, there would be no women that existed. So we must also think of homosexuality in reference to heterosexuality, because that is the only thing that we can base it off. So, but the straight mind just kind of, only focuses on homosexuality on heterosexuality, and straight mind people need to start thinking of heterosexuality, in its reference to homosexuality. So heterosexuality does not order all human relationships. It's not how everyone works in society. So I thought it was really neat how she was able to tie in, politics and theory, just like the other readings, alluded to the political aspects of sexuality. So I just wanted to tie all of this in with Marilyn Frye's The Politics of Reality, Essays in Feminist Theory, the Oppression chapter. It's this analogy of oppression being like a bird in a bird cage. So if you're looking at the bird cage, you'll see wires, kind of holding it in. And if you look at the wires one by one, you just really don't understand why, like, the bird's not going anywhere. But if you take a step back and look at the bird cage as a whole and seeing it as caging the bird in, you'll come to understand why, the bird's not able to go anywhere. So it's kind of like what oppression does. It immobilizes and reduces people in a sense that it keeps them caged in to the state that they are oppressed for. So this reminds me of a lot of queer theory, so the construct of, gender being socially constructed and oppressive by nature, and how, where feminist theory came out of. I feel like this really relates to that, because people are you think very microscopically when you are trying to, when you are failing to view these heteronormative norms as real, as normal. But when you take a step back and look at it microscopically, you come to understand that a lot of these categories and these socially constructed roles are arbitrary. They are oppressive, they are demeaning, devaluing, and although you might not take on these roles, you still should understand what they mean to others in society, even if you don't necessarily affiliate with that type of identity. So this, to be caged in, to be immobilized, comes out of others' ignorance or lack of motivation to really look at the bigger picture, or as things as a whole. They just have like one-track mind, narrow-minded. But if they just step out and analyze the situation from a different lens, they would be more understanding, or, more intelligent as it relates to what it means to identify with something that is a crisscross from your gender or from your sexuality. So I think the birdcage is a really, really great way to provide an example of what oppression looks like. And I think that queer theory definitely has some components of, to be caged in this birdcage and immobilized.